So, Enneagram and human design. So, first of all, if you're getting into Enneagram and you're already into human design, then I think you can recognize a lot of the not self patterns in the so-called lower consciousness or less evolved expressions of the Enneagram type. However, the whole idea of higher versus lower consciousness and evolution, all this stuff, is very much a personality crystal thing. It doesn't belong in human design. It's a seven-centered paradigm, and Enneagram is a seven-centered system. So if you're already into human design, you're getting into Enneagram, I absolutely think you can understand it through the lens of human design. Now, going the other direction is a little trickier. I went the other way. I knew Enneagram for years before learning human design. What I've come around to is the realization that Enneagram has a lot of accurate things about it, the same way as Myers-Briggs does. Like, I really am a 1, and Ra probably was an 8, for instance. And, you can kind of see the personality is going to belong to one of these types. However, the whole idea of improving yourself and evolving the consciousness by integrating towards your integration point is actually really harmful and very seven-centered. I actually met somebody, it was interesting because I was very into Enneagram for a while, and I met somebody who grew up in an Enneagram cult. This person grew up literally with everyone that was into Enneagram, and this person hated it and never wanted to see it again because these people were all extremely not self. You can be so into Enneagram, just like you can be so into Buddhism, just like you can be so into any of these seven-centered mental-based systems and be completely not self. And it's basically all about your mind's supremacy over the body. So there are ones out there who are using the mind to try to grow towards 7, to make mental decisions based around the 7 or something, right? And there are 4s who are trying to grow towards 1 mentally and so on. What I've found is when you naturally live your design, you actually do live out the integration in Enneagram. But I guess I bring this up because, I just think, first of all, it really matters what direction you're coming from. If you're coming from Enneagram to human design, definitely wait until you've exhausted your Enneagram studies, because it doesn't really make sense to study both at the same time. It's actually going to cause problems. Like, if you feel like you've reached a dead end of your Enneagram studies and are ready to study human design, then go into it, and then you can come back to Enneagram after a couple of years, and you will see how so much of the language and the Riso Hudson and the Claudio Naranjo and all this stuff is extremely propagandistic for the personality crystal, right? It's very much all about the mind over the body and using the mind to evolve and all this stuff. And there's a lot of different versions of, Enneagram. There's Christian versions, there's chaos theory versions or chaos magic versions where it's all about meditating on the void and going into the void and releasing. And it's very similar in that sense to transcendental meditation, TM, which is another extreme personality crystal thing, And I knew someone also who grew up in a TM cult. You'll see there's no such thing as a human design cult. There can't be, just like there can't be a Taoist cult. But there are Buddhist cults. There are meditation cults. TM is a cult, there are Enneagram cults. Even objective personality gets cultish. And I mean, it's not a cult, but it gets into that. But there cannot be human design cults. Why not? Because it's design crystal, and cults are very much personality crystal. They're all about the mind and the power of the mind and coming together around an outer authority. And human design's not. Human design is about being empowered through your own inner authority. So in any case, I guess all I have to say really about Enneagram, I would like to, in the future, go into more of the intersections between Enneagram and human design. I think it's fascinating, and I think there's a lot of really good stuff there, and I notice it. It's not that I don't notice it. I do. I'm a 1, and I notice my not self, the mind, doing all the 1 stuff and saying, you got to be right. I'm okay if I'm right. You're okay if you're right. And it'll tie in with my undefined ego to say, well, you better prove to them you're right. And it'll tie into my undefined spleen and say, don't let go, keep going. And it'll tie into my undefined solar plexus and go, well, make sure you're polite about it and make sure you don't hurt their feelings and all this stuff. And so the mental decision making and the mental rationale is all there. And Enneagram is accurate. It's just a 7-centered system, so it's accurate at describing the personality the same way astrology is accurate, the same way Myers-Briggs is accurate. All of these are accurate. They just do not give you the tools to live your design because they do not put you in touch with your body's decision-making power. So I study all of these systems. I love talking about these systems. I guess I'm just saying there's a huge difference coming from human design or having a human design background and being able to see the Enneagram as the mind, as the not self, as this basically parasite on the body, as U.G. Krishnamurti would put it, which, by the way, there are others out there who've come to very similar conclusions to human design. They're typically not very popular. So U.G. Krishnamurti is one of them. U.G. Krishnamurti. Not many people know him. Most people confuse him with Jiddu Krishnamurti. No relation. So just as an example, you can see that there are people who come to the conclusions of human design, the conclusions that the mind is essentially trying to control the decision-making power of the body, but that the body actually has the intelligence there. And you find this in hypnotherapy, and you find this in muscle testing and all sorts of areas. The thing is, only human design has really, human design is the only system I've found that has actually eliminated the mind's ability to gain reward in a 7-centered way through exploiting. I mean, even with human design, there's a danger, right? Because you see a lot of people who are very much stuck in that 7-centered paradigm who are like using human design to gain self-confidence or using human design marketing techniques to boost your followers or all this stuff. It's a shame, right? Because that's the 7-centered paradigm. But what you will find is that those people can never quite reach that inner circle of human design practitioners that are on the actual fractal line. So I think that human design is fairly protected in that sense. I'm not really worried about true sidereal human design or these other things because there are copies of copies of copies. It's a game of telephone, and by the time it gets to that point, the information's been lost, and it just sucks for those people that they're not closer to the fractal. So I'm not really worried about that. It's more that those who actually are on the fractal, or who actually are, I almost see it as climbing your way up the fractal. Like I had to fight tooth and nail for probably around 14 years, climbing my way up the fractal until I finally met someone who traveled to Ibiza, who had gained the imprint and who had passed on the imprint to me through physical aura connection and so on. And not that you absolutely need that to begin the experiment. But I guess what I'm saying is, I fought my way up the fractal, meaning that, in 2006, I was hanging out with David Icke talking about conspiracy theories and stuff. And, by 2009, I was hanging out with astrology people and talking about global cycles. And I guess maybe it was even earlier that I was into the conspiracy stuff. But, and I was or I found Goro Adachi and went into synchromysticism. And, my point is, I've moved up the fractal, or I guess you don't really move up the fractal, but I guess I see it almost like I've found the people that are on my fractal by digging myself out of the muck of the masses to find the select few, right? And it took me years and years and years to do that. And so I think others are doing that too. And so some people find Enneagram and they're possibly getting into human design. And I would like to be able to bring those people into real human design knowledge if possible. So, that's why I want to kind of do these videos where I'm able to talk about the Enneagram types from the human design lens. The gist of it is basically that it's just describing your personality. It's funny because some people say that Enneagram describes your unconscious, and that it's Myers-Briggs that describes your consciousness. I don't think so. I think Myers-Briggs describes your cognitive functions, which are the way, or your attentional hierarchy, which is how you pay attention to things and how your mind operates. And I think the Enneagram describes what is essentially the not self, which is the mental decision-making of the mind and what is its hierarchy. And I don't think it's unconscious at all. I think it's absolutely conscious. I think that a 1 is very aware of how bad it feels to be wrong. And an 8 is very aware of how bad it feels to be weak. And a 4 is very aware of how bad it feels to be not special, just like everybody else, with nothing to contribute. And each of these bad feelings is the not self. And what human design kind of facilitates is the experiment of what happens if you don't try to immediately fix these bad feelings. What happens if the 1 feels wrong, and instead of trying to be right, just allows themselves to be wrong, and that's been my experiment. What happens if I just don't prove? What happens if I just let go and don't hold on tightly? I mean, I have undefined ego. I have undefined spleen. So, that's kind of where I'm coming at it from, is that Enneagram does describe the personality. It does so with a 7-centered vocabulary, with a 7-centered goal of personal mastery, and with these paradigms from personality crystal consciousness, which is all about evolution and improvement and getting better and all this stuff. And none of that really has a place in human design, but nevertheless, Enneagram is accurate. It is an accurate taxonomy and an accurate vocabulary for describing the personality. The only difference is, from the human design lens, we realize that this description of the personality, it's essentially going to have a lot of value judgments in terms of the so-called levels of evolution of consciousness. Very similar to Ken Wilber, somebody else who I completely cannot stand and have nothing to do with whatsoever. Because Ken Wilber, to me, is just, the perfect example of someone who really is not mutative at all and has no connection to the mutative people. I mean, the fact that Ken Wilber went after postmodern and critical theorists, postmodern theorists and so on, and French deconstructionists and people like that, who are extremely mutative and very much part of that freaky genius mutative edge, just shows me how Ken Wilber is so completely stuck in a 7-centered past that would be appropriate hundreds of years ago, but has no place in the present time. And that's how it is for a lot of Enneagram practitioners also, and a lot of Myers-Briggs and everything. I mean, it's kind of like something we've learned in human design is that, there are still cave people walking around. There are cavemen and cavewomen walking around because they just are. I mean, it's like there are people that are cut from different eras of history, and every era of history continues to persist beyond its chronological time as an impact on future generations, or as an available mode of being that future generations can adopt. So there's more people into rockabilly now than there ever were in the 50s. And there's more people into punk now than there ever were in the late 70s, early 80s and stuff like that. Which is a similar idea here. It's kind of like, yeah, great. If you're Richard Mason, then everything you're doing is right at home in the golden dawn of the 1850s. It's not appropriate for human design. Human design is a mysticism for our era. Nevertheless, with a human design background, you can navigate these different 7-centered systems, and you can see how and where they are accurate in applying to descriptions of the personality primarily. And it can be interesting because it can be another signpost. It can be the signpost that when you're living your design, you naturally take on a lot of the traits of the integration. I think it's probably the same thing with personality typology and the inferior function, how you individuate through the inferior function. And the 7-centered systems are so entrenched that we're still going to have these metaphors like evolved consciousness and stuff like that, which really have no place in human design. And they have a place in Gene Keys. Gene Keys is very much a 7-centered interpretation of human design. It's very much an older paradigm of mind over body, and a very yang system. I would say human design at its core is extremely yin, which is funny because a lot of people who are deeply entrenched in the 7-centered systems see human design as yang, and that's literally just because there's so much propaganda from the personality crystal bundles against design crystal. For anyone who studied the dream side of human design and dream analysis, dream rave, you'll find that it's the light field and the demon realm. And it's called the demon realm, the design side, because that's how the personality side sees it. So what's funny is a lot of the implicit value judgments in Enneagram and Myers-Briggs and so on are very much against the body and the design and the yin. And so they're very yang systems because yang is the mind or the spirit. Buddhism is the most yang you can get. I mean, obviously there's many versions of Buddhism, and some people have told me, no, Zen Buddhism's not yang. It's about no mind. It's about losing your mind. Well, no, it's about no body. It's about overcoming the suffering with the mind, and the suffering is equated with the body. Anyone interested in Zen, by the way, highly recommend Zen at War. Brian Victoria, I believe, wrote it. Talks about D.T. Suzuki and other, there were some Zen Buddhists who opposed the war, and they were promptly killed by the rest of the Zen Buddhists, which tells you something about how deeply yang it is. Human design is really the only yin system out there besides maybe Taoism or kind of one-offs like Yuji Krishnamurti. And it's very hard to find people who've had this yin experience. I would urge anyone interested in, understanding what I mean here to read some of Yuji. If you just look up Yuji Krishnamurti, you'll find this wonderful page with all of his books that he releases to public domain and so on, or he released. He's passed now, but he talks about people seeking enlightenment and people seeking spiritual uplifting and seeking to transcend the body and all this stuff, and how it's basically no different than a drug addict, looking for the next fix.